It's Cardboard Time, episode number 97, and I'm your host, Arwen Kathke. On today's episode, we have reviews of Endeavor Deep Sea, Reef and Ruins, and a interview with the incomparable Daryl Andrews. So not a huge amount going on these past couple of weeks. I did get a game day in this past weekend with my friend Jordan, so we got some things to the table. Always feels great to get some things knocked off that shelf of aspiration. And also gearing up for PAX Unplugged, starting to do some prep work for that. I will officially be there. That will be my next convention, so y'all can see me there. Very excited to catch up with some friends. I can't believe that it's the middle of October already, and within a month and a half, we'll be heading out to Philly to see everybody. It's just absolutely wild that that's the case. So the shelf of aspiration is down to 125. That is down by 2. 2 new games that came into the collection. The first one through crowdfunding was Endeavor Deep Sea, which I will be talking about today. And a review copy of Arcs made its way to my door, so I'm super excited to play that. I have been waiting to play this one. I did have the opportunity to play it with Jordan, but I have heard that you kind of want to stay away from the 2-player version if you are super kind of conflict averse, that direct conflict. I heard that the 2-player version is, so I want to give it a fair shake. I want to get a good first impression of this, so I'm going to be waiting for the 3 and 4-player version. I will probably play it at 2 players after that, just to make sure that I do my due diligence and give it a good review. But yeah, it's kind of nasty from what I've heard. So looking forward to playing that quite a bit. Have heard some wonderful things. 4 games came to the table, the first being Rallyman Dirt, and I do need to do a review for that in the future. This was a racing game that I specifically requested because I've heard a lot of very good things about the system used. Not like what you traditionally find in other racing games, and that was the case. So looking forward to talking about that. Endeavor Deep Sea, obviously I played that because we're going to be talking about it. Time Stories as well. We finally got that to the table. That has been in my collection for the longest time. I think I bought it back in 2016 or 2017, and it is just sat on the shelves. I do want to get through the main story that comes in the box before I do talk about it. We did go through our first time loop and, had a good time with it, but I do want to finish out that story before I talk about it with everybody. And then Destroyer of Words also came to the table, a very unique word game. I do want to play this one at 4 before I talk about it, because we played it at 2. We're not sure if we got some things wrong as well. So I do want to give this one another chance before I talk about it. Inevitably, at some point, I'll be looking for games to talk about, and I'll want to talk about that one. But to get on to the games that I am talking about today, the first thing up is Endeavor Deep Sea. This is from 1 to 5 players, and it is 5 if you have the deluxe edition. It's 4 otherwise. 60 to 120 minutes, designed by Carl D. Visser and Jarrett Gray, and the art is by Fahed Al-Raji. And this was published by Burnt Island Games and Grand Gamers Guild. Plunge into the modern era where a planet's vast interconnected oceanscape is one of the last frontiers to discover and explore. Experience a deep, new, ever-changing adventure in this follow-up to the smash hit Endeavor Age of Sail. In Endeavor Deep Sea, you head an independent research institute with the goal of developing sustainable projects and preserving the fragile balance of marine life. Throughout the game, you'll recruit field experts and use their abilities to explore new locations, research dive sites, publish critical ecological papers, and launch conservation efforts. Expand your expertise, develop your team, and learn as much as possible about the sea. The action your institute takes now could mean a healthy ocean and a sustainable future for the planet. Endeavor Deep Sea is designed by Jarrett Gray and Carl DeVisser, the same creative team behind the smash hit Endeavor Age of Sail. This edition is set in a new era of nautical discovery, but uses streamlined rules which will be familiar to fans of the original game. So this I did back on crowdfunding after I talked to T. Kyrez. They said that it was the first game that they bought, if I remember correctly, getting into the hobby, and then was kind of turned off by some of the problematic elements. The original iteration of the game was about colonization. There was slavery involved. The BGG short description, when I looked it up, talked about spreading glory, which kind of sets off some red flags for me. So not something that I necessarily want to experience, but they had talked and praised the Reef theme. It stripped the problematic themes off. It turns this into a game, more about ecological conservation instead. So I backed it, and I wanted to support such a, drastic re-theme and something that was kind of more focusing on the positive. The impact that you're having on the game is more about, positive interactions, doing your research, what you're going to learn, what you're going to help bring to, as opposed to going around and colonizing people and that kind of thing. So really glad to see this. I think that it's something that, could be a nice trend to start revisiting some of these games. There's other games that have kind of had this done, and I'd like to see that done a little bit more. So when this arrived, the first thing that struck me was the packaging. This came wrapped in paper instead of the standard shrink wrap, so that was really cool to see. I was like, oh, this is nice. It looked really cool. It fits with the theme as well. And it arrived fine with no damage, so I would be perfectly happy with my games arriving like this in the future. There's also no plastics in the box. That includes the insert, which was FSC certified. I had no idea about this organization that ensures products come from responsibly managed forests. So that was also very cool. The insert was still sturdy. It works very well despite not being plastic. One of the trays for the specialists actually needs some sort of lid or, something to hold the specialist tiles down. This just uses a sleeve. So you have this insert that's made of this recyclable material, sustainable material, what have you. And it just goes inside of a paper sleeve, which does very well at protecting everything. If you're going to turn it upside down, sideways, all of that, there's a little bit of movement that can happen, but I think for the most part, it did its job just fine. So from a production standpoint, I think that it was extremely well done. I would love to see more games using this material that was, developed. I don't know if the material was developed by Game Trays, but the design of the game trays were done by them. I'd love to see that more going forward. I think that it was extremely well done and would be a welcome change to the way that we do things in the hobby. So it did take a while for us to get used to the iconography. I think that I definitely could have used a reference sheet, especially at the beginning of the game. Most people will probably be comfortable a few games in. I think once you're about halfway through your first game, most of the symbols are going to make sense, but you will still have to refer to the rule book quite a bit until you get to see most of the symbols. There is a separate reference sheet that describes each of the tiles and some of the symbols that don't appear multiple times, but I would have liked to have seen, especially at the beginning, a little reference sheet. If I didn't need it after a while, that would be fine, but it would be something that I could give to newer players. BGG does have a printable sheet for those who would like them that works well, so you can go online. You can print this off. I just would have liked to have seen it in the box. The core of the game for me was managing your action discs. Since half of the actions that you do not only require an action disc to place on your specialist to take the action, but they also require an action disc that you're going to leave on the action space on the tile itself. So you can't also take an action between one round to another unless you have the ability to remove the disc from a specialist, which is limited by one of your tracks, which, is such a cool mechanism for action economy and probably one of the best I've seen in quite a while. So in this game where you're going to want to do everything, you are going to feel very limited in what you can do. I felt in a good way. It encouraged me to be more efficient, try to do as much as I could with the actions I had and with the discs I had, and make very strategic choices about, hey, am I going to bump up the rank of the specialists that I can get and make the actions more powerful, or am I going to get more discs that are just put into my economy? Or am I going to move up this track that I can take those discs off of the specialists so that I'm able to use those mechanisms for the specialists I've already drafted? So there's a lot of choices. There's a lot of things to think about, but the core of the game itself is very solid and straightforward, in my opinion. So I love this mechanism. I think it was, again, one of the most satisfying things I have seen in quite a while when it came to action selection. The engine building felt great as well. So, each round you're going to draft a specialist. That specialist can give you the potential to do new or maybe more powerful actions. Promoting specialists was so they came in on their junior side, and you could promote them to their senior side, which gives them the ability to do something even better. It also frees their action space up. So if you flip it over and it has an action disc that you've either put on there on a previous round or that round, once you flip it, that action disc goes back to your supply. And if you have an extra action disc, then you're able to place it on there to use their new and improved action that turn. So I love doing that. You did feel at the beginning like you weren't able to do much. You're only doing just a couple of very minor things. You might have like 2 actions that you're going to take on your first round. But by the time that you get to the end game, it feels great. You're going to be going to this space, which allows you to do this, which gives you an extra sail action, which allows you to move over here so that you can set up for your next turn. You can see where I'm going with this. Things that I love, things that absolutely enamor me to a game, this does. So I think that, starting off, you are trying to set yourself up in the early game to really build your engine up to do some amazing things at the end. And it does feel condensed, like 7 rounds does feel very, very condensed. Actually, 6 rounds. I apologize. 7 specialists that you'll have at the end. That's how you know that the game is over. So I think you're going to feel limited in what you can do, but it is still incredibly satisfying, and it leaves you wanting more. It leaves you wanting to go back in and explore the game more, which I thought I was going to feel a little bit more limited than I did, but it's that good limitation that I think works. I also love the positive player interaction with the linking actions that you have. So some spots, if you have 2 players placing discs on each of the sides of a linked action, In the middle, you'll have a little bonus that both of you will get. If you fill both of those spots yourself, you'll get that bonus. But it does feel very satisfying that provides encouragement for players to come and place a disc on that spot so that you can both get something. So there's a lot that you can do with that from a strategic standpoint as well. So yeah, exploration also feels very satisfying. You have new bonuses and things to do on each board as you're uncovering them. You do get a choice between two of the boards that you put down, so you can have a little bit of agency over what goes down. You're not going to have like a huge amount. It doesn't foolproof everything that you're going to absolutely get something that you want to do, but you will get something good out of it. And it does mitigate that a little bit to the point where it does feel fair. It's not just a random flip. From a color vision perspective, this review is going to focus on the deluxe edition. And the only issue between basically two of the colors that I found, I think it's the 5th player color, was on the impact tokens. And I think that this could be solved by one player placing their impact tokens face down. So one side has a screen printed star, the other side does not, if I remember correctly. So everything else is double coded, either through a additional symbol that's different on the token or on the shape of the submarine. So there is that mitigation there, but the impact tokens did not quite do it for me. The symbols on them are all the same. And unfortunately, I did have a couple of problems with two of the colors being very close. But again, if you're not getting into that 5th player color, at least for me, it wasn't an issue. It might be an issue for you. So just something to watch out for. I think it's something that you can mitigate fairly easy. So for my final thoughts, I am so incredibly glad that I backed this. From the production side of things, extremely well done. I am so happy that this was able to be rethemed because I think the mechanics of the game are fantastic. They're incredibly satisfying. The action selection in this game is so incredibly good, and that disc management is frustrating in quite possibly some of the best ways that I've seen in a long time. So I think the theme made a ton of sense in the actions that you were doing. It was very well incorporated. So from the ecological aspects of the production to the wonderful gameplay, I think that this is a very solid contender this year for not landing just in my top 10, but also my top 5. So this game is going nowhere other than to conventions. It's kind of a big box, but I want to have other people play this game because I had such a good time with it. And we were left just astonished, and we were like, this was one of the better games that we played this year by far. And looking forward to pitting it against some of the other games. I think I have my top 1, but this is definitely hovering in my top 5 for the year, which has got some really good company. So it should be very proud of the standing there. So that is Endeavor Deep Sea. And let's talk about another game that, spoiler alert, ranked very highly for me. This was Reef and Ruins. This plays from 1 to 100 players because it's a roll and write. 20 minutes, designed by Carla Kopp. The art is by John Merchant, and it was published by Weird Giraffe Games, or it will be published, rather. Hydras and otters team up to unlock satisfying combos while exploring reefs and ship ruins for treasure in Reef and Ruins, a roll and write that gives you the satisfaction of a crunchy, large sheet, small font, roll and write spatial puzzle engine builder in a smaller, quicker, more approachable manner. There's 1 die for each head of the Hydra, either for them to venture into shipwrecks to search for treasure, work together to enchant their treasure, or send otters to the reef to get pearls. Each head of the Hydra typically wants to do something different, but they occasionally can agree to work together for Hydra's sake. At the start of each game, players will choose ship ruins, enchantments, and reef sheets, and all compete to unearth the most most valuable items. Players play simultaneously, each choosing between sending their hydras into the ruins for treasure, their otters to enchant the treasures, or to send both into the reef to gain bonuses there. After 18 rounds, players figure out the values of their found treasures, then enchant them for more points, then add in any reef benefits. Reef and Ruins is a roll and write standalone game that is set in the Wicked and Wise universe. So thank you to Carla Kopp and Weird Giraffe Games for the review copy. This I was insistent that I get a review copy of, and Carla can confirm this. Olivia Lothry also can confirm this, that I was very insistent that I get a review copy. The review copy is not a final version. There are some tweaks that need to be made. But I played a early version of this at a game designers conference earlier this year in Cincinnati. Carla brought that with her. She was in the late stages of playtesting. I was instantly enamored with both the thematic concept. I mean, who doesn't love an axolotl hydra and otters, and the gameplay. So the gameplay really stuck out to me. And I think the main thing that stood out for me was the need to balance the 3 dice and what you're able to do with them. So are you going to spread out and do a whole bunch of stuff all over your sheets, or are you going to focus on one? And I think it's a limited decision space that you have with the 3 dice. You know what you have. You have a little bit of an ability to modify them if you spend shells. But the decisions are just so agonizing in determining how to best spend them over the 3 sheets that you have in front of you. So you're trying to figure out, okay, I have these 3. How can I combine them? If I do this over here, then I can do this and this over here. Or if I do this and this here, then I can do this over here. Or I can combine all 3 to do this, big turn over on this sheet. That depending on how I've set things up could be really, really good for me. So I love that. There's a lot of really good decisions. And I think that's the big thing that stood out for me was that balance and, making sure that, you were utilizing your dice in the best way possible. So the best way, to kind of describe this, is a roll and write with 3 different sheets. The enchantment sheets is mostly there for your point multipliers. Your ruins are kind of providing you your base points. And then your reefs are going to provide you with bonus opportunities that are going to enable you to do something extra. They do give you a little bit of points towards the end. You're probably going to want to, uncover some of the bonuses for extra points. But all 3 are really important to balance correctly. And I think that this is also where this stands out because I found just focusing on 1 or 2, it's very difficult to win. It's very difficult to get a really good score. If you try to just do 1 or 2, you can, really maximize a couple of tracks, but at the same time, you're missing out on so much more that if you do smartly distribute your dice, you are going to go and really, really get those point scoring opportunities and bonuses and multipliers and everything else kind of, the best that you possibly can. And again, for an engineer, that to me is a lot of fun. It might not be fun for you, but for me, I love it. So unlocking the ruin for placement with the other dice also provides an interesting twist. So you have to spend a die to even unlock the spot to put numbers. So you really have to make sure that every single number that you're putting in there is worth it and you're really making progress. And each of the ruins has a different scoring condition. So one might be that you have 2 numbers that add up to a specific number. You might have odds, you might have evens, you have a track that you are only supposed to go up by 1 number or down by 1 number each time, and you want to minimize the amount that you are changing direction. So if you go 1, 2, 3, 4, And then you go back down to 3, that's a direction change. And the fewer direction changes that you have, the better your point scoring opportunity is going to be with that. So having to unlock that and then using your dice in the best way possible to make sure that you get numbers over there that are really going to help you was really cool for me. And I like that. There's a lot of nice variety in the Reef sheets as well. And it changes the game up significantly. Each has a different mechanic to it. So you might have one that you can go and you can only move out to adjacent spaces that have a number attached to them. And then if you get a line or a column or certain spots, that's how you unlock your bonuses. Others have you playing with polyominoes with a restriction that if you're going to place a polyomino over a differently marked space, you have to cover up that whole space. So that provides kind of a challenge of trying to figure out how you place all your polyominoes. So there's a lot of variety in those Reef sheets as well that really changes up the gameplay. And I think that there's a really good potential for expansion there as well. So I'd like to see what Weird Giraffe is going to do with that. The shells were basically your mechanism to increase your die value or decrease it by 1 for each shell that you used. They were just limited enough that I felt like I had to be really smart with them. And they actually felt good to get instead of just being throwaways like, oh, I'm getting, this, number that, okay, maybe I can put this here and I guess I'll get these 2 things. Like, it felt important when you got them. It felt like you were getting more options, especially when it came to those ruin spaces where you really needed those numbers to be what you needed them to be. So I like that as well, and really having them seem important as opposed to throwaways for a bonus was cool. There's really good combo potential without getting overwhelming most of the time. Some of the time I was like, okay, well, I'm figuring out where to put this, and then I know that this is going to unlock this, so I have to deal with this, so hold on just a second. But even with that, I felt like the game still moved quickly. I think that, 20 minutes for most players is going to be fine. If you have somebody that's a little bit AP prone and does really want to think about what they're doing, you might be into more of the 30-minute range, which is still a relatively breezy, quick game. So I think that, it was very interesting kind of seeing that where you had that combo potential, but it still flew by. Also, there's a lucky number bonus in there, and I wasn't sure about adding that in. I was like, okay, it might seem like a extraneous mechanic at first. So basically, every player is going to get a number at the beginning of the game, and each time that appears on the Reef or Ruin sheets, they get 2 points. I really wound up liking this, and more so for beginners. I think that this is especially helpful because it gives them a direction. And, they see this number and they're like, okay, I've got to put this in as many spaces as possible and kind of maximize that. So that can give them a direction and dictate kind of how they're going to go. So I think that is helpful too. I will say that I think that this might be a little bit trickier than a standard roll and write to teach. It's going to be easier than one of those really super brain burnery, like your Hadrian's Wall, etc. brain burners of roll and writes. Like those are super difficult to teach because there's a lot that goes into them. This is going to be a little bit harder than a standard roll and write, but I think that you'll be able to get through it relatively quickly, once you get the core concepts. And again, it's one of those games that once you get a few turns in, people know, okay, I have these 3 dice. This is what I can do with them. From a color vision perspective, I did not have any color vision issues whatsoever with the game. So once again, I do commend Weird Giraffe games. I do recommend them to people from a color vision perspective because most of them are very, very well done when it comes to that. It is something that the team is very conscious of in the design and the production, making sure that they're accessible for people. So for my final thoughts, in a year that I have played a lot of very good roll and writes, and this includes the likes of very good games like Cascadia, Rolling Realms Redux, Reef and Ruins for me is probably going to be my roll and write of the year. It really goes back to the simple core of what I like in roll and writes. It's a small box experience. It's got big gameplay, crunchy decisions, but it fits. It's portable. It's easy enough. You know, I do my side table reviews every once in a while. It's very easy to get to that and play solo or bring it into work and play it at lunch and have some really good decisions, but at the same time, be quick about it and not have it be this huge burden of a game. So yeah, this is probably going to be one of the rare cases I actually laminate the sheets of the game because I feel like I'm going to go through them pretty quickly. I have been showing this off to people, especially at work. It is on Kickstarter now as of the release of this podcast. It just released today, as long as everything goes according to plan. So you can check it out on Kickstarter if you are in the mood for a really good roll and write that's going to hit that sweet spot between giving you some crunchy decisions and being able to still be portable and still teachable. I think that this is definitely one that I highly recommend, and glad to see that the final product is very close to what I played way back when earlier this year. It feels like an eternity ago. So that is Reef and Ruins. And stay tuned, because coming up next, we have an interview with Daryl Andrews. On today's interview segment, we have Daryl Andrews, who is a freelance designer and frequent co-designer of board games. Daryl has over 45 published games to his credit and has worked with 15 designers over his career. Some of the designs that you might know include Bosk, Kadama 3D, Seven Summits, and two that I'm very interested to discuss with him, Sagrada and Sagrada Artisans. Daryl has also spoken about the topic at events such as Toronto Fan Expo and the San Diego Comic-Con. Daryl, welcome to Cardboard Time.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I'm super excited to talk to you. You know, again, Sagrada, probably what you're most well known for. You've done a lot in your career, so much that I didn't cover. Anything that you have done that you want people to know?
Yeah, no, I'm just very thankful to get to work on board games. It's a hard thing for people to do beyond, for a long time I called it a jobby. It was a bit of a mix of, having a full-time job, but also your hobby being your passion and where you sink a lot of your time into. So I really, I really see it as a gift that a few games have been successful enough that it has freed me up to be able to focus on game design and really like working full-time in the industry.
That is so amazing. And could you give us a little bit more of a background about your history in gaming? How did you get started in the hobby? How did you get started in design? Things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up as one of those. I was an only child, but I was an only child that loved board games. And so I was constantly trying to recruit others to play games with. My mom's a phenomenal cook and would always have different people coming over for meals. And because of that, I would spend the meal trying to recruit people to play games. And so from a young age, I was hooked. I had really fallen in love with, traditional games, but the ones that really surprised me and felt different, one was Scotland Yard. And so as a kid, when I discovered Scotland Yard, I thought that was super unique and special, and so I loved playing that. And then over the years, as I got older, I discovered things like Settlers of Catan and Puerto Rico, and again, those became just excuses to get around a table with people and have fun and feel like you could be clever, but you could have competition, but everyone's still hopefully friends at the table afterwards. And that, yeah, it just really, I got hooked. And then fast forward to, I live in Canada, and I lived in a city called London, not London, England, but London in Canada. And I started connecting with this, we called it the Great Canadian Board Game Blitz. And it was a tournament of getting to play 5 games all in a day. And so you could show up, you didn't have to know the rules, but we would play wonderful games like Raw and Power Grid and just a lot of like classic Euros. And from that experience, that even broadened my horizons to the world of games. I thought it was just like a little tiny hobby of mine, but realized there was a lot going on. And one of the fun things they did was they did a round that was all games designed by Canadians. And that got me thinking about designers. So I'd never even really thought about that. They just were, games that I bought. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, maybe I even have met someone. And I found out that the designer of one of my favorite games at the time, a game called Belfort, designed by Sen Von Lim and Jay Cormier, Sen lived in my city. He lived in London, and I thought that was amazing. And so I reached out, and he invited me to come play games at his house and play test. And that was the beginning of my journey of even just thinking about game design and being open to finding an excuse where maybe my fit is.
Yeah, it's crazy to think how small the world is
Right?
when you get to know, like, this designer grew up right around the corner from me or lives right by me, or I've met them in passing at this different event that I've been to.
Yeah, I love it. It was wild to me to just think someone was just down the road. And Sen is a very generous human and was very open to being inclusive. And that's one of my favorite things about this community is there's a lot of people that prioritize being inclusive and bringing people together.
And we'll talk about that in a minute. That actually wasn't on my questions for once, which is kind of surprising because inclusivity is very important to me. But I do want to talk about your co-design work because we have a lot of designers that come on the show. We've talked to a lot of people that design, but we haven't talked to a lot of people that do a lot of co-design work. So when you do co-design, how do you decide what to work on? What are your priorities and what does that process look like?
Yeah, well, I think it's fun because I know if I made a game by myself, that would be a totally different game than if I collaborate with someone. And so the stories and games that I make with people become these new, unique mashups of who we are as people and what we like. And you can bounce off of each other. I mean, it all comes back to, again, even inclusivity and the things we can make together. It's exciting to me to kind of jam. I mean, I'm not a huge musician, but I just think like when you find your bandmates and you just kind of like find a rhythm, it doesn't even mean like that someone is the best and you're just looking for the best person. You're looking for the person that you jive with, the person that you can kind of just ping pong off of each other and come up with. Yes, it's like improv, and you just want to feed off of the other's energy, and it keeps you motivated. It surprises you, it challenges you. And so for me, that's one of my metrics. I've tried to co design with some very talented designers, and it just didn't necessarily ring true. But then there's other people that when you know it's right, you just know it's right. And so you have that feeling. I've had the privilege of working with a few different people and making multiple games with them. And that, has been really special. And usually I find I kind of fall into a specific role depending on the co-designer. So some designers, they only have a few ideas and they want to really work on those. And I'm maybe more of a chameleon and say, sure, let's work on those. Other people, they might say, oh, I don't have a lot of ideas, but I'm really good at the math, or I'm really good at prototyping, or I'm really good at, different elements. And so I think usually I kind of dovetail into the complement role. Sometimes, with another co-designer, we'll bounce a bunch of ideas off each other and see where the overlap is, which idea sparks for both of us. So, I might have 20 ideas, they might have 20 ideas, but all of a sudden, their 12th idea, I go, oh, I love that. And so because of that moment, then we go, oh, well, then that's the thing we got to make. Like that, that sings to you, that sings to me. Let's see what we can design together.
I think it's a very interesting process because anytime that I have worked on my own designs, they have been with somebody. And I like the fact that you mentioned that spark because I've kind of felt that. Like you
Hmm.
just have that connection with somebody, you are starting to bounce ideas off of each other, and they're just spiraling into a lot of different mechanics and themes, and oh, we could take this and make it like this, and this fits this
Exactly.
theme. I really love that kind of feeling of having that spark of inspiration there.
Yeah, no, it's special. And when you have those moments, you realize how, life's too short, but those are those unique, great moments. So, like, why not put your time and energy into those, special opportunities?
Awesome. So let's talk about Sagrada for a minute. And Sagrada was actually an early favorite of mine. I got into the hobby around the 2011 timeframe, but didn't really get deep into it, start acquiring a lot of games until that 2015, 2016 timeframe. And, despite struggling with some color vision issues, I always really like the game. I think there are some things that you can do if people are willing to help you at the table with the original version. Sagrada Artisans, I've mentioned on the podcast before, has kind of changed that with distinct fixes to make it more accessible to players. So, what lessons have you learned from this, going from the original Sagrada not necessarily being friendly to now Sagrada Artisans being playable by way more people? What lessons have you taken away from that?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. And something that progressively I've become more aware and more passionate about. I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to think as designers about ways to make games more approachable, more accessible. And all of these questions make us all better designers because then we get to provide something that more people can enjoy together. So I would confess that when I first made Sagrada, that wasn't a question on my lens. I have some now go to questions that I'm always asking myself as a more experienced designer. But early on, and we even had a couple colorblind individuals or different levels of struggle that were early playtesters. But it's funny, we just automatically adapted. So we didn't think about it from delivering on the design, but then watching them and hearing from the whole community of like more and more chances to make the game better. We really learned about communication and components and some fixes. Thankfully, Floodgate was really passionate about it too, so we offered alternative dice that you could purchase. We offered texture in the dice, and similarly in Artisans, we were really in particular with the help of Peter Woken, the graphic designer, thinking through textures so that became a way. It was easier in Artisans to communicate that through the pencil and through the pages. But all of those became really just little fixes along the way. We always knew that, a color driven game was still going to be difficult, but it mattered. And so that's why we really wanted to put time and effort into that. And we're going to continue to always think of ways to break down barriers and think about everyone. I mean, end of the day, one of my favorite things about games is that we're all on a level table together playing, and so let's make sure that the fun is there too for everyone. And so that's been really important. I mean, anything from, for instance, I have an app on my phone that now I practically every time I'm prototyping, I look through 4 different kind of chrono. I don't know the tech. I'm not very scientific, but the proper lens to be able to see the different color spectrums and, things like thinking about how to articulate. I try to articulate it in 3 ways every time. So for instance, like maybe it's through a letter or some type of icon, but then also then texture is an opportunity, etc. So I just every time now when I'm communicating, a player color, I try to think about it on more levels than just shortcutting it to just, oh, it's a color, done. But instead, like, what are some ways that just makes it more easy for more people? And I'm thinking about that now more and more. One of the questions that I recently was asked, someone's doing a really cool study, was thinking about autism and how can we be thinking about autism in our game design. And that's another, I'm just trying to build more arrows in my quiver of what questions to ask and make sure I have a broad playtest group, because those are the moments that even just natural solutions come up, where if I have a more broad group of people involved in the playtesting experience, then I'm going to ask those questions and I'm going to make sure that we're addressing those.
So I think that's a fantastic answer. And thank you for kind of delving into that process, because I think that it's very important for aspiring designers, existing designers, and, even those who have had a lot of different designs to their credit. Those are things to always watch out for. So I think one thing that kind of kept coming up that I heard was bringing more people to the table and making things maybe a little bit more inclusive. You mentioned that earlier. What does inclusivity mean to you at the table? And what could maybe be better done in the hobby to kind of promote that?
Yeah, this is a great question, because I think we're all trying to improve and trying to learn, and we're finding examples that I bet in 5-10 years will be super normal and just be part of our process. But we're still finding each other and listening to each other. And so a tool, for example, that I just discovered, I'm not a big RPG person, but one of my experiences recently, I have a friend who ran just a one shop. I actually had the head of games from Hasbro over, and she was trying to get to know RPGs more because she knows games, but the president of Hasbro is the former head of Wizards of the Coast. And so she was a little intimidated with her upcoming meeting with with the head of Hasbro. And so she asked, can we just do like an RPG? And I invited a friend to lead us through. But a perfect example that I thought was great was they had, for instance, two tools. One was a card at the table that at any time you could just touch and just indicate that the table could be like, oh, like we're in sensitive waters. And so, maybe it's as simple as asking, how could we help in this moment? Or let's move on, or let's, adjust. And that was like a takeaway that I was like, oh, well, we could just do that all the time. Like, this is an example of like, if someone's uncomfortable for any reason and they're willing to do that as a way to just say, hey, you know, we're touching on something, that was cool. And another one was the GM, his name's Jason Azevedo. He has a channel called Realmsmith. He passed out this deck. I forget the name of the deck, but it had questions in it that said, like, I would rather not touch this topic or this subject matter. And so everyone had the opportunity to glean from that deck and pass that to, in that scenario, the DM, and say, yeah, like, I don't want to go there. And again, that was just like this great moment of just like, oh, that's really clever. And that's a way that we could do that in different ways. It doesn't have to be through that deck. It doesn't have to be that we always have a dungeon master, but we can be thinking that way and asking ourselves, how can our game night make sure that everyone feels good and everyone feels safe and that everyone knows that they're welcome? I do some things like, for instance, I'm really trying to be more and more proactive about giving some boundaries and guidelines and encouraging, for instance, for my playtest nights, we'll say very proactive things that we believe in, and to make sure that anyone who shows up, like, you understand that this is a safe space for everyone. I'd rather call that out early and make sure that everyone knows that we're all here to have fun and no one should feel unsafe or unwelcome. We come from, this is my early days, but when I started playing games, there was a lot of this kind of attitude of, down in the basement, exclusive kind of club mentality. And I think we really need to shake that off. So we have to be proactive and think of ways of how do we say, this is for everyone. For me, for playtesting, for example, it's sometimes hard to get minority groups. It's sometimes hard to not have just a bunch of dudes. So I want a variety of people from all walks of life, age. I want variety of people because all those voices, especially for playtesting, is really helpful to make better games.
I think that's so incredibly well said, Daryl. And you brought up the topic of, I think it's called the X card. That's like the card that you
Yeah.
touch that, hey, I don't want to go here. And I think that's one thing that I saw that I was really impressed with. I really need to look up that deck as well, because that sounds really like a very, very useful tool at communicating without having to do that verbal communication that some people might not necessarily feel comfortable with.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really wonderful. So if I think of it, please, anyone reach out on social media and I'll try to look up the actual name and share that.
Oh, very good. So I am sitting here with my Tim Hortons mug as we speak. Daryl is from London, as he said. And Daryl, how are the game design and convention scenes up north of the border? I mean, you mentioned Sen. There's a few other designers that we've had on here that have been, basically residents of the Great White North. What do you think of the convention scenes and the game design scenes up there?
Yeah, we are shockingly on a ratio side of it. On the math side, I mean, I'm a math geek, so I think the ratios are really high on the amount of creators that are from Canada. So that's really encouraging. And it's also probably a sign of the trailblazers that also brought people along the way with them. We had a really cool organization. I mean, it technically still exists, but it's not very active. But there was a group called the Game Artisans of Canada, and we shorthanded that to GAC. Not a very great sounding name. It worked. And we had in it kind of a journeyman process, coming alongside each other and mentoring one another. And that mentorship brought a lot of people up. There was a lot of people that, passed the ladder down so that others could find chances and opportunities. The other neat thing was in Canada, we were one of the first to have game cafes. Snakes and Lattes was a real trailblazer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think spaces like that, again, created jobs, that created events of finding each other. And so now there's game cafes everywhere. It's comical how many are around. So that has been a real fostering. But we don't have a lot of conventions. It's surprising, but we're real used to coming down south. We're, used to going to the States for the majority of our conventions. We have a few. There's some small ones that people are blossoming up. We have some design events like Protospiel North, and we have Breakout, which is a convention in Toronto. I never got to go, but Shucks on the West Coast that has always been a dream of mine to attend. There's a few events in the Calgary and Edmonton areas, but again, that's pretty far from me. For anyone who doesn't know, Canada is an enormous space, but we're pretty spread out, but we're all kind of along the lower border. I think it's something crazy, like 80 to 90% of Canada lives across the border. I know, for instance, I've gone to, Fan Expo, which is not necessarily a board game convention, but they have some board game representation there. I know, some of the cafes, for instance, a friend of mine runs a game cafe in Halifax, and he does a board game convention every September, which I wish I could be going to, but couldn't go this year. It's been a couple years since I've been, but it's always lovely. So yeah, it's tougher to find conventions, but we have a lot of designers that still go out of their way to support one another. It's mostly in homes. It's mostly, online, people encouraging each other. We have some pretty great stars. I think, even a few publishers up here. So anything from, I think of Helena Capel and just like the amazing job she has done with leading Kid Table board games and Burnt Island. I look at a company like Connor McGooey has up north, Inside Up Games. And on the West Coast, I had the privilege of getting to work with Stephanie Kwan, First Fish Games, where my most recent co-design with Adrian Mistwind, got to work with her. But again, like a lot of these companies, they're only 2, 3, 4 people because things are, pretty spread out and pretty sparse. And a lot of, people are wearing many hats. I also am blessed right now I recently moved to Toronto. Toronto is a bit of a mecca when it comes to game designers and game stores. I used to drive to Toronto to go to Board Game Bliss and different things like that. And so now I'm a little spoiled. I can jump on the train and go downtown. I can meet up with other co-designers, like Erica Bayoris is a local and actually works full-time as a game designer for Spin Master. Eric Lang is really active in the community and is in Toronto here most of the year when he's not in Singapore. So yeah, there's a lot of great humans, a lot of people breaking out. I look at someone like Roberta Taylor or Christopher Chung, or yeah, just a lot of great creators. And we don't mind coming to visit and give us an excuse to come to the States and attend some of the more established big conventions.
Well, I'm actually hoping to get up to your neck of the woods this coming year.
Ooh,
Hopefully, I don't have to move up there, with everything going on down here.
absolutely.
But we're hoping to kind of make a visitation to a bunch of friends, do the Toronto loop, go
Yes.
through Ottawa. I've never been to Montreal, so I've
Oh,
always
you
wanted to
gotta
go
go.
there.
Yeah. Well, when you are, please let me know. And yeah, those are all great pockets to go visit. Matt Paquette out in Ottawa, and Al Leduc and Yves Tournier. Montreal is packed with people as well, and some publishers out that way.
Hmm. So, any upcoming projects that you want people to know about?
Oh, that's a fun question. I mean, the downer is always the ones that I can't talk about yet, because those are the
Hmm.
ones I'm probably working on and just trying to get them across the finish line. But a couple that I can talk about. One is I had the fun opportunity to do a co-design. It's actually a remake of an old Wolfgang Kramer game. But one is with Arcane Wonders called Lines. And we're really excited about that. Supposedly, there's going to be a copy airship to demo at Essen, but it'll be the first time kind of in its finished state and coming out next year. But it's based off of, and I'm butchering how you say this in German, so I'm sorry, but Oxel, or it's AUFACHES. It's about trucking. Originally, it won in the early 80s, a Spiel des Jahres. And now, it never came to North America. That was one of my childhood games that was unique. And I still to this day don't know how I got access to it as a kid, but someone imported it. And so when the opportunity came up to reimagine it, it was a big deal to me to get to work on. And so that's with Arcane Wonders called Ley Lines. And it's very cute, magical. It's kind of like in the countryside, following along little magical routes to collect the resources you need. Another that was recently announced is a Donald Duck game called Happy Camper with Maestro Media, who I do some consulting with. And the opportunity came up to celebrate Donald Duck's 90th anniversary, which is his birthday was just on July. And so we're celebrating over the next year his 90th birthday. And so Donald Duck should be hitting stores and fulfilling, I believe, in December. So very excited about that. And then a third, which was at least hinted at Gen Con, but I've signed Hacienda is being remade with Pandasaurus games. So those three are some Wolfgang Kramer, great games of the past that, I was able to be a part of and reimagining them and modernizing them, learning from, some of those 10, 20, 30 years old. We've learned a bunch of things along the way. And so those games have been tightened up. So those are a few. Another one that I hasn't really hit the press yet, but technically has been mentioned, so I'm happy to share it, and it won't be out though until next Gen Con, so it's a little while to build the hype, but I got to work on another Batman game. I did a Batman game with Morgan Donteval, and so we have an upcoming game that's the animated Batman called Enemies of Gotham, and you get to play as all the different villains in the animated Batman series. So those are some of the ones I'm really excited about.
Some exciting titles to be sure. And I think that there's always something special about taking some of those older game mechanics and bringing them more into the modern day. Some really magical things that you can do with that and really make something special.
Yeah, it was a real privilege. I mean, If I were to make my Mount Rushmore of game designers, Wolfgang Kramer would easily be on it. One of my all-time favorite games, well, I think my favorite game of all time is El Grande, but many of Wolfgang's other titles I love, and yet as people come into this hobby, they don't necessarily know some of those older games. There's a lot of new games that come out. And so I think there's a lot to be said about reaching back into our past and reimagining and restoring some of those great games. And some of the games, they serve a purpose. Like, for instance, Donald Duck Happy Camper was based on a game called Goldland. Goldland was never released in North America, but Goldland was like a 90 to 2 hour game. If you were to play it now, I think a lot of people would think, it's slow, it's long, but we reimagined the whole game to take place in 30, 40 minutes. Well, I think now all those ideas and experiences, it's a great 30, 40 minute experience. You're going to maybe or hopefully feel like once you finish the game, like, oh, I want to play again. And so that just even speaks to attention spans and how much available time we have. And, when do we game? Playing a strategy game 20, 30 years ago was maybe an all day event. And now it's like, what could I squeeze in after dinner?
Now, that's very, very true. So, this kind of concludes the board gaming section of things. And I did want to touch about some more personal things. The first one is you're known for your very distinct smile in your photos. We were at Gen Con and I heard a couple of people say, oh, we need to, I can't remember who it was, but somebody said we need to take a picture for Daryl, and everybody was, smiling like you do in your photos. Is that intentional that you do that?
Yeah, it's funny. I love it. I think it's just like a really fun, positive, exciting thing to just take pictures and celebrate each other and seeing people. It started very organically, but now it is definitely intentional. And my all-time favorite thing that pops up, actually, it's a recurring memory on my Facebook wall, and it makes me so happy every time it does. But David Preddy, the president of Simon Games, it drives him nuts. He legitimately has passed messages on to me saying, tell Daryl to stop doing that. And so one time he went into this rant at Gen Con to me about how it drives him crazy and, keep your mouth shut. And while he was doing that, I had a friend take a photo of him yelling at me while doing the face. And now it recurs every time, this grumpy face of David Preddy and me doing a big smile with my mouth open. And yeah, I just think it's a fun kind of like trademark and little memory that now I look back on very fondly, and I'm glad it's caught on to be a bit of a tradition.
I think we should all want to enjoy each other's company. And I think that that's another sign that you are happy in the place that you're at. And I love seeing that. I think it's really cool.
Thank you.
So you're also a fur parent like I am. Very proud of Charlie for not barking, because sometimes he does that while I'm recording, and then, you have to go back and
Totally
do all the other stuff. So how did Lincoln come into your life?
Oh, I mean, I can definitely say it was at the perfect time and a real saving for me, because timing wise, and my wife and I, we don't have any kids, but we had gone back and forth. My wife's more of a cat person. I'm more of a dog person. And we thought we were at a stalemate. And then out of nowhere, because I do travel a fair amount for conventions, my wife said, you know what? I think I would like us to get a dog. It would be nice company when you're away, and I'd feel a little safer, and just, the companionship. And so I immediately said, okay, I am going to count 30 days. And if you still have this view in 30 days, we're buying a dog. And so I waited 30 days because I did not want it. It is a big commitment. And so I didn't want to take that on unless we were both, tag teaming it. Everything we do together. And she still was gung ho. So we looked at a few different types of dogs and reached out to shelters and you name it. And actually, we're starting to worry that we weren't going to find one until we met Lincoln at 6 weeks. This great, wonderful breeder who actually is an animal control person in the region. And she always does. Our Lincoln is a West Highland Terrier. She's She especially loves West Highland Terriers, and she actually got her. This is such a weird full circle, but she always gets her breeding dogs from this one family in I think Illinois, who is also a gamer family. And a weird fun fact: the day I bought Lincoln, like or brought him home, our come home day, I posted a picture, and that family reached out and said, "Oh, is the dad's name blank? I think it's Whiskey." And we were like, "Yeah, how do you know that?" And I knew them. I forget the channel's name, but the dad made like family board game content, and so we've just kept in touch loosely from just the odd time meeting at conventions. And he said, "Yeah, my wife is an expert in West Highland Terriers, and yeah, your Lincoln's dad is from us." So I was thought, oh, this is such a weird small world, but that's just an example of like gamer world spread out all over the place. We picked out Lincoln, but I had to go to Essen. And when I got home from Essen, it ironically was Halloween. And so we picked Lincoln up on Halloween, the day after Essen. So we're coming up to our gotcha anniversary. But yeah, he was such a great addition to our family, and unfortunately that it was just before COVID. So I attribute a lot to Lincoln keeping me positive and keeping me active during a time that, it was very dark and very lonely. And he was a ray of sunshine and kept me active and got me out of the house to walk the dog at a time that I needed it most. So I'm a very proud fur parent, and Lincoln has changed my life.
Yeah, I think that they really do. And I know that it's kind of cliche to say, oh, they changed my life and that, but I think it's really true.
Yeah.
Like, I did not want to have that responsibility.
Yeah.
I didn't want to have to have, arrangements
Yep.
for Charlie while I was out of the house because my fiance is now traveling with me. But it's really a nice thing to wake up and,
Mm,
while I'm getting ready for work, he's kind of there hanging out. I get to pet
totally.
him every once in a while, and it's so nice.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you.
So, what are your hobbies other than gaming?
Yeah, I mean I am a big fan of just deep diving and being a geek in all kinds of categories, but probably I'm most into, which is less common, but I am a sports fan as well. And so that's often one of the things that I follow and get passionate about. I'm also a big fan of movies. I think I got hooked at a young age, but what really was a funny attribute to the hobby was I worked at Blockbuster back in college, and you would get 10 free rentals a week. I wouldn't use them all, and I would often get movies for other people, but that got me more and more into appreciating movies and thinking about movies at a different level. And I even down the road then started to do some blogging. I even did red carpet interviews for the Toronto Film Festival and things like that. So I really enjoy good storytelling. I think movies just give you a chance to fall into a world. It's like games, and enjoy the medium on a different kind of scope or a different type of commitment. So I would say those are probably my biggest hobbies. I also mentioned I travel a lot for conventions, and so I'm also a bit of a foodie. My mom
Hmm.
was a great cook, well, still is a great cook. And because of that, I love exploring great food around the world. It doesn't have to be fancy, street vendor food, whatever. I also like fancy. And then I like to cook myself. So I have a smoker, and I do a lot of experimenting and cooking myself.
What's your favorite food to cook?
Well, right now, because I had a bunch of points saved up on my credit card, I used them for a brand new Traeger smoker. I feel like I'm kind
Ooh,
of
yeah.
cheating because the thing does all the work for you. But I've recently been, just trying anything I can on it. So anything from like I did some pulled pork recently, and that worked out great. Some ribs, yeah, some just whole chickens, you name it. I'm really enjoying experimenting and learning how to use the Traeger.
I got one of those, I think it was 2 years ago, and it's still holding up. It's an absolutely fantastic addition to all of my kitchen tools. I think I use that more than anything else other than maybe the oven and the microwave.
Right.
It is incredible.
Awesome. Well, that's encouraging to hear because yeah, when I used up all the points, I was like, "Whew, this is a big purchase." I hope shiny things sometimes have a tendency to, you think it's a great idea and then it shows up. So I'm hoping I'll still be passionate about it 2 years down the road.
I think you will be.
Oh, that's a fun question because I some designers don't play a lot of games. To be honest, they're play testing and they're focused on prototypes most of the time, and I get that. But I think it's really important to keep playing games and see what's out there and what people are doing. I just got to play a few games this weekend that I really enjoyed. I think the standouts for me were River of Gold. I just got to play, and it was great. I thought it was really well done and just like approachable. It's like that next level up from like maybe you've played a gateway game, like a Ticket to Ride, and you're looking for something with a little more crunch after that. So I really enjoyed that. Similarly, I also for the first time played Harvest from Keymaster. That just fulfilled for me not too long ago. And I'm a sucker for worker placement. I really enjoy worker placement, and it was a nice worker placement that I felt like each player kind of had unique and interesting choices to make. So those are a couple that hit my table recently. I'm also just a big fan of small games. They're just easy to get to the table. So I've been playing a lot of like Far Away. That is a one that I can't get enough of. And it's just such a simple little game. I kind of kick myself thinking, why didn't I come up with this game? Because it's just nice and nice low price point, but gives everyone lots to think about. You can chat while you play. So it gives just like a really positive table experience.
That's awesome. So how can people get a hold of you on social media?
I mean, I'm kind of on most of the main ones. Usually it's either my full name, Daryl Andrews. Sometimes it has my middle initial, which is an M for Michael. So, if you find me on Facebook or Instagram, X, you name it, please reach out. I'm not super active. I try to be. It usually comes out in spurts. Like if I'm at a convention, there's lots of action, and then all of a sudden, there's a lull for a few weeks. So I definitely a little bad for not checking or replying right away, especially after travel. I kind of crash and hide out in my cave to recover. For instance, like after Gen Con, I got sick for like almost 2 weeks. And I remember coming out of that cocoon and being like, whoa, I'm sorry. I've not talked to anyone. So conventions can be exhausting and you really like put your best face forward. But then when you can go home and crash, I do that. People assume I'm a big extrovert, but as an only child, there's a lot of introvert in me. So that balance is, I love seeing people, but I also like my alone time. So please, anyone out there, reach out, Facebook, whatever's kind of the best way. And especially I want to encourage anyone who's thinking about or wants to make games, if I can be an encouragement or a help on your journey, please don't hesitate to ask. I think a rising tide helps all boats. And so it's fun. I love the energy and excitement, especially from new designers. Some of us old designers can get jaded and grumpy. So, please keep bringing the passion.
Well, Daryl, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us and wish you well on your designs. And we'll see you at an upcoming convention because you're at all of them. So.
That sounds great. And when you come up to Canada, please let me know and we'll make sure to organize a game night or something.
I absolutely will do that. Thank you so much. And I think that'll do it for us today. If you want to know anything more about Cardboard Time, you can always go to the website. The Instagram is at cardboard_time, and the Blue Sky is at Cardboard Time. The Discord is on the Tabletop Express server. You can always email for an invite, or the link is on the website. A fantastic community over there. I highly recommend anybody that's a listener, go over, check it out. and join. And any questions, suggestions, ideas for discussion topics, or that email invite is at cardboardtime@gmail.com. And as always, thanks again for listening. We'll see you around the table in 2 weeks for another episode of Cardboard Time.